You know, when you get old, you start believing that family is all you've got left. You raise your kids, sacrifice your sleep, your dreams, and your money just to see them live better than you did. You tell yourself that one day they'll look back and say, "Dad, you did good." But I was wrong. I never thought I'd be the man sitting at an airport alone, clutching a worn-out leather bag, waiting for a ride that wasn't coming. People walked by. Couples holding hands, families rushing to catch flights, kids laughing with ice cream cones. And there I was, 65 years old, realizing that love doesn't always come back the way you give it. My name's Robert Hayes, and this is the story of how my own son and his wife left me stranded at the airport, right after convincing me to sign over my house to them. But before you judge me, before you call me foolish, let me tell you what really happened. Because sometimes it's not stupidity that blinds you, it's love. I remember that morning like it was yesterday. The air smelled like rain, that heavy, cold kind that hangs around before a storm. I woke up early, made myself a cup of coffee, and sat in my recliner staring at the framed photos on the wall. My wife, Linda, smiling at me from a picture we took in '92. My son, Ethan, at his high school graduation. Back then, he looked so proud, standing there in that blue gown, holding his diploma like it meant the world. I used to think that picture was my greatest accomplishment. Now I'm not so sure. Ethan had always been a smart kid, confident, a little stubborn, but ambitious. After college, he moved to Seattle, married a girl named Jessica, and built a life I was genuinely proud of. They didn't visit much, maybe once or twice a year, but whenever they did, I made sure to treat them like royalty. I'd cook their favorite meals, clean the house spotless, and pretend that getting old wasn't wearing me down. When Linda passed away 5 years ago, everything changed. The house felt too quiet, too big. I tried to fill the silence with gardening, church, and old Western movies, but nothing really worked. Ethan called a few times a month, and that kept me going, until one day his calls turned into favors. "Dad," he said one evening over the phone, "me and Jess have been thinking about moving back to town, to be closer to you." My heart leapt. I'd been waiting for those words. "That would be great, son," I said, almost too quickly. "This old place could use some young energy again." He laughed. "Yeah, and we were thinking, maybe we could all live together for a while. Save money, help you around the house. What do you think?" I didn't even hesitate. "Of course, Ethan. You and Jess are always welcome here." That's how it started, with a simple, warm conversation that felt like family. A few weeks later, they showed up with boxes and smiles, saying how excited they were to be back home. For the first time in years, the house came alive again. Jessica filled the kitchen with the smell of candles and cinnamon, and Ethan helped me fix the squeaky porch swing. We'd sit outside in the evenings, beer in hand, watching the sun go down. It almost felt like Linda was there, too. But then came the small changes. At first, they insisted on handling the bills. "You shouldn't worry about money, Dad," Jessica said sweetly. "We'll take care of everything. You've done enough." It sounded kind, but within a few months they'd replaced my furniture, redecorated the living room, and turned Linda's sewing room into Jessica's office. They said it was just temporary, but I could feel my home slipping away piece by piece. Then, one afternoon, Ethan sat me down at the kitchen table. He had that serious tone I remembered from his teenage years, the one he used when he was about to ask for something big. "Dad," he said, "we've been talking to a financial advisor. He says it'd be smart to transfer the house deed into my name now. That way it'll avoid taxes later, and if anything happens to you, the property stays in the family." I looked at him, confused. "But it's already going to be yours someday, son. Why rush it?" he sighed. "Dad, it's just paperwork." "It doesn't change anything. It just protects the house." Jessica nodded beside him, her hands folded neatly on the table. "We just want to make sure everything's secure. You can trust us. I wanted to. God knows I did." So a week later, I went with them to the notary office. I signed the papers, the ones that supposedly kept my house safe. Ethan smiled and patted my back. "You won't regret this, Dad." I didn't realize until later that I already had. It wasn't long after that when Ethan suggested a family vacation. "You deserve a break, Dad," he said. "Let's go to Florida, some sunshine, a nice hotel, fresh air." I hadn't been anywhere in years. It sounded nice. I packed my suitcase, made sure to bring my favorite blue shirt, and waited by the door that morning, excited like a kid again. They drove me to the airport, all laughs and good spirits. We checked in, grabbed coffee, and talked about the beach house we'd rent. When it was time to board, Ethan said, "Dad will go park the car and meet you at the gate, okay? Don't worry if we're a few minutes late." I smiled. "Take your time." I watched them walk away. That was the last time I saw them. 2 hours later, the gate closed. My phone buzzed with a text that said, "Something came up, Dad. We'll explain later." You go ahead. But later never came. I sat there long after the plane had taken off. My ticket was crumpled in my hand, and I just kept staring at the departure board like maybe their names would show up beside mine. They didn't. People around me moved with purpose, families hugging, kids pulling their suitcases, flight attendants smiling, and there I was, still waiting for a son who wasn't coming back. After a while, the airport speakers started announcing the next flights. I must have looked lost because a young woman who worked there came over and asked if I needed help. I told her I was fine, but my voice cracked halfway through. She gave me that look, the kind that says you're not fine, old man, but I'll let you pretend you are. I went to sit in the food court. I bought myself a cup of coffee I didn't really want, just to have something to do with my hands. The seat across from me was empty. That's when it really hit me. I wasn't going on any vacation. I'd been left. I pulled out my phone and called Ethan, straight to voicemail. I tried again. Same thing. Then I tried Jessica. Her phone rang once before it cut off. I texted, "Where are you?" "I'm waiting at gate C4. No reply. An hour passed. Then 2. I must have called 20 times before I realized what was happening. My stomach felt heavy, like someone had filled it with stones. I didn't cry, not there, not in front of strangers. But I could feel it coming. That slow kind of sadness that crawls through your chest until it's hard to breathe. I finally called a cab. The driver, a kind guy with a thick accent, asked me where I was headed. I almost said home, but the word caught in my throat, because I wasn't even sure if I had one anymore. When I reached the house, the front yard looked different. The porch light was off, the curtains were drawn, and the car that had been in the driveway was gone. I unlocked the door, stepped inside, and felt something strange: silence. Not the peaceful kind, but the kind that tells you you're not supposed to be there. Half the furniture was missing. The photo frames were gone. Linda's rocking chair, the one she used every morning with her tea, was nowhere in sight. I went from room to room, heart pounding, calling out, "Ethan, Jess?" But deep down I already knew they weren't there. The kitchen table still had the same coffee ring from that morning we signed the papers. My name was still on the mug I'd used for years. But the house didn't feel like mine anymore. It felt empty. I called Ethan again, and this time he answered. His voice was cold. "Dad," he said, "I'm sorry about the airport. Things got complicated." "Complicated?" I said, trying to stay calm. "You left me there." "What the hell happened?" He sighed like I was the one being unreasonable. "Dad, look, about the house, Jess and I decided to sell it. We found a great buyer, and honestly, it's better this way. You can use part of the money to get yourself a smaller place. Something easier to manage." I felt my chest tighten. "Sell it? Ethan, that's your mother's house, our home. You can't just—" "Actually, Dad," he interrupted, "it's my house now. Remember, you signed it over." I went silent. The air in the room felt heavy, almost poisonous. He kept talking, something about how this was best for everyone, but I couldn't hear him anymore. The only thing I could think about was the sound of that pen scratching the paper at the notary's office. My hand signing away everything I'd built. Everything Linda and I had made together. "Ethan," I said quietly, "where's all my stuff?" He hesitated. "We packed most of it in storage. Don't worry, we'll send you the details." Then he hung up. Just like that. I stood in the middle of the living room staring at the walls where our family photos used to hang. The house didn't look like home anymore. It looked like a stranger's place I'd broken into. I didn't sleep that night. I just sat in my recliner, the only thing they'd left behind, and stared at the doorway, waiting for someone to walk through. I don't know what I was expecting. Maybe guilt, maybe a miracle, but all that came was morning light, sharp and cold through the window blinds. That's when I decided to go through the paperwork, the notary documents, the transfer deed Ethan had convinced me to sign. I pulled them out of a drawer, laid them on the table, and read every line. My hands shook as I saw what I'd missed. It wasn't a transfer for protection. It was an outright sale, and for $1. Legally binding, Complete ownership transferred to Ethan Hayes. I sat back, closed my eyes, and for a long time I didn't move. Linda always used to say, "People show their true hearts when money's involved." I used to think that was too cynical. Now I wish I'd listened. That afternoon I packed a small bag, a few clothes, my late wife's photo, and my old watch. I didn't know where I was going, but I knew I couldn't stay there. Not in that house. Not anymore. When I stepped outside, the autumn air was cool. The sky painted in that pale gold light that makes you nostalgic for no reason. I locked the door behind me and whispered, "Goodbye, Linda." Then I started walking, no destination, no plan. Just a man trying to figure out how his own son could turn love into betrayal. I ended up at a small diner about a mile down the road, the kind of place that still had checkered floors, coffee for $1, and waitresses who called everyone hun. I sat at the counter, my suitcase by my feet, and stared at the steaming cup in front of me. I wasn't really drinking it. I just needed somewhere to sit that wasn't empty of life. The waitress, Mary, looked to be in her 50s. She had kind eyes, the kind that could see straight through you. After a few minutes, she stopped wiping the counter and asked softly, "Rough day, sweetheart?" I let out a small laugh, the kind that hides pain. You could say that. "My son just sold my house and left me at the airport." She blinked, then gave a half smile. "Well, that's not something you hear every day." "I wish I wasn't saying it," I said, stirring my coffee. "Feels like my whole life just got erased." Mary nodded. "Family can break your heart worse than strangers ever could." Something about that hit me. Maybe because it was true, we talked for a while. Or maybe I did most of the talking. I told her about Linda, about Ethan when he was little, how he used to run around the backyard pretending to be a firefighter. I told her how I used to work double shifts at the hardware store just to keep food on the table. How proud I was when Ethan graduated college. Mary just listened. She didn't judge, didn't interrupt. Sometimes that's all an old man needs, someone who doesn't look away when you start to break a little. After a while, she refilled my coffee and said, "You got somewhere to go, Robert?" I shook my head. "Not really. I guess I'll figure it out." "Well," she said, pulling out a napkin and scribbling something on it, "there's a motel a few blocks down. It's not fancy, but it's clean and cheap. Tell them Mary sent you. They'll treat you right." I smiled for the first time that day. "Thank you, Mary." "Don't thank me," she said. "Just promise you'll eat something before you go." I did. A slice of apple pie and a small scoop of ice cream. Linda would have loved that. The motel wasn't much, a narrow hallway that smelled like bleach and carpet that had seen better days. But the man at the desk was kind, and the room had a bed and a lamp. That was enough. That night I lay awake thinking about everything. The papers, Ethan's voice, Jessica's fake smile, the way they said, "You can trust us." I thought about calling the police, but I knew it wouldn't change much. I'd signed the deed willingly, and no law in the world can protect you from your own blind love. So instead, I decided to call an old friend, Tom Callahan. Tom and I had worked together at the store for over 20 years. He was a good man, the kind who still believed in handshakes and keeping your word. "Rob," he said when he picked up, his voice rough and familiar. "Haven't heard from you in a while, buddy. Everything okay?" I almost said yes, but the words caught in my throat. "No, Tom, not really." I told him everything. The airport, the house, the deed. There was a long pause on the line. "Jesus," he muttered. "That's cold. You sure about the paperwork?" "I've got copies," I said. "But it's all legal." "I signed it." Tom sighed. "Well, maybe you should come stay with me for a bit. I've got the extra room since Martha passed. We'll figure something out." I hesitated. "I don't want to be a burden." "Burden? Rob, you spent years helping me fix up that place. Your family. Get your stuff and come over tomorrow morning." I almost cried when he said that. Not because of pity, but because someone still cared. The next morning I packed up my small bag again, checked out of the motel, and walked to the bus stop. It was chilly and the sky was gray, but for the first time in days, I felt like maybe I wasn't completely alone. Tom lived about 40 minutes away in a small town called Maple Ridge. When I got off the bus, he was already waiting in his old Ford pickup. His hair had turned whiter since I'd last seen him, but that grin was the same. "Hop in, old man," he said. When we got to his house, it felt strange. Not like home, but safe enough. We sat on the porch drinking coffee while he listened to me go over every detail. When I finished, he leaned back and said, "Rob, I know a lawyer. Not some fancy suit, but a real straight shooter. Maybe there's a way to prove you were manipulated." I shook my head. "Tom, I don't want revenge. I just want to understand why. Why would my own son do this?" Tom sighed. "Because greed doesn't care who it hurts. And sometimes the ones closest to us think love means forgiveness, no matter what they take." Those words stayed with me. That night after Tom went to bed, I sat outside on the porch. The wind rustled through the trees and somewhere in the distance a dog barked. I looked up at the stars, the same ones Linda used to point out during our evening walks. "I don't know what to do, Linda," I whispered. He was our boy, and for a moment I could almost hear her voice in the wind, soft, calm, the way it always was. "You'll know what to do when the time comes, Robert. Just wait." I didn't know what that meant then, but I would soon. Because 2 days later I got a letter in the mail, and it changed everything. The letter was sitting in Tom's old rusty mailbox, tucked between a grocery flyer and a bill from the electric company. At first I didn't think much of it. Hardly anyone sent me mail anymore, and the few that did were usually insurance offers or those fake final notice scams. But this one had my full name written neatly across the front. Mr. Robert Hayes. The return address caught my eye. Hayes and Walker Realty Group, Seattle, Washington. My stomach tightened. Ethan worked in Seattle. I took it inside and sat down at the kitchen table, my hands trembling as I tore the envelope open. Inside was a letter printed on thick white paper. It read, "Dear Mr. Hayes, this is to confirm the completion of the property sale located at 112 Oak Ridge Lane. The final payment has been received and transferred to the account listed in your file. Please note that your remaining personal belongings are available for pickup until the 15th of this month, after which they will be considered abandoned property. Sincerely, Melissa Grant, Senior Agent Hayes and Walker Realty Group." I stared at the words until they blurred. My house, the home Linda and I built together where Ethan took his first steps, where we planted the maple tree in the front yard, was gone. Sold. Tom looked up from across the table, his reading glasses halfway down his nose. "What's it say?" I handed it to him without speaking. He read it, his face darkening with every line. "That bastard," he muttered. "He actually went through with it." I nodded slowly. "It's official now. I don't even own my memories anymore." Tom set the letter down and poured me another cup of coffee. "You know, Rob," he said, "this isn't right. Maybe you can't undo the sale, but you sure as hell can make them answer for what they did. That's theft dressed up in paperwork." I wanted to believe him, but I was tired. Tired in a way sleep couldn't fix. "Tom, I'm too old for courtrooms and lawyers. I just need peace," he leaned forward. "You won't get peace until you face them." He was right. That night, I barely slept. I kept thinking about the last time I saw Ethan's face, his smile at the airport, the way he patted my shoulder, how natural he'd made the lie sound. The anger built quietly deep in my chest, mixing with disappointment and love until I couldn't tell which hurt more. By morning, I knew what I had to do. I called the realty office from the letter. A woman answered cheerfully. "Hayes and Walker Realty, how can I help you today?" "This is Robert Hayes," I said. "I'm calling about the Oak Ridge Lane property." There was a pause. "Oh, yes, Mr. Hayes." "That sale's been finalized. Congratulations on a smooth transaction." "Transaction?" I repeated. "Ma'am, I didn't sell that house." "My son did," she hesitated. "Well, according to our records, Mr. Ethan Hayes is the legal owner and signatory on the sale. You transferred ownership to him 2 months ago, correct?" My voice cracked. "I was told it was for estate protection, not so he could sell it out from under me." Her tone softened. "I'm sorry, sir. I really am. But once the deed transfer was completed, the property became entirely his. There's nothing we can do now." I thanked her quietly and hung up. My hand was shaking so bad I almost dropped the phone. Tom came in from the porch. "Well, they sold it," I said, staring out the window. "Someone else is probably standing in my kitchen right now, wondering who left that scratch on the wall by the doorway." Tom walked over and put a hand on my shoulder. "You still got your dignity, Rob? Don't let them take that too." I nodded, but my mind was spinning. Later that afternoon, while Tom was out getting groceries, I sat with a notebook and started writing. Not a letter of anger, but one of truth. I wrote to Ethan. Every word I'd held back, every emotion I'd buried under forgiveness. Son, you've taken everything your mother and I worked for, and somehow I'm still hoping there's a piece of good left in you. I don't want your money. I don't want revenge. I just want to understand what happened to the boy who used to bring me Father's Day cards made out of paper and glue. You say this was best for everyone, but tell me, when did greed start sounding like love to you? I folded the letter, sealed it in an envelope, and left it on the table. I didn't even have his new address, but somehow I knew he'd get it. That night, Tom and I watched an old baseball game on TV, but I couldn't focus. My heart was restless. I kept thinking about something Linda once told me when Ethan left for college. One day he'll forget who taught him love if you don't remind him. Maybe she was right. Maybe I'd let Ethan forget too easily. So I made a decision, one that even surprised me. I was going to Seattle. Not to fight, not to beg, but to look my son in the eye and make him hear what he'd done. When I told Tom, he looked worried. That's a long trip, Rob. You sure you're up for it? I smiled faintly. I've got nothing left to lose. Tom handed me an envelope with some cash. For the road, he said. Tom, don't argue. Just go find your answers. The next morning, I packed my bag once more. The same one I'd carried when I thought I was going on a family vacation. This time it felt heavier. Not because of the clothes inside, but because of everything I'd lost. As I boarded the bus to Seattle, I glanced out the window. The sun was rising, and for the first time in a long while, I felt something I hadn't felt since Linda died. Purpose. I didn't know what I'd find when I reached my son's doorstep. Anger, shame, maybe nothing at all. But one thing was certain. I wasn't that helpless old man at the airport anymore. I was going to get my truth back. The next weekend, the air smelled of pine and wet earth. Emma and Michael drove up to the small lake house they had rented years ago, during their early days of dating. The same creaky porch, the same rocking chairs, the same quiet water that had seen them laugh, argue, and make promises. They sat side by side, a thermos of coffee between them. For a while, neither spoke. The silence was thick but comfortable. Finally, Michael looked at her and said softly, "You know what's strange? I feel like we spent half our lives trying to prove something to everyone else." Emma smiled faintly. "And the other half trying to forgive ourselves." He nodded. "Do you ever regret it?" "Regret what?" "Not settling down earlier. Not staying when things got hard. The years we lost." Emma took a slow breath. "I used to. I thought if we hadn't drifted apart, maybe we'd have built something more stable. But now, no, we needed those years. You needed to grow, and so did I. Otherwise, we'd just keep hurting each other." The wind rippled across the lake, scattering golden leaves on the surface. Michael reached into his jacket and pulled out a small photograph, the one of them at 25, taken on this same porch. "We were so young," he said, almost to himself. "We didn't even know what love meant." Emma looked at the photo and smiled. "Maybe we still don't, but we know what it isn't. It's not ownership. It's not perfection. It's not about fixing each other." He turned to her, eyes warm. "So what is it then?" She met his gaze. "It's choosing the same person, even after knowing every flaw. It's still caring when you have every reason to walk away." For a moment, Michael's hand brushed hers. It was gentle, unsure, like a first touch all over again. "Do you think?" he asked quietly. "It's too late to start again?" Emma looked out at the water, the reflection of the sun shimmering on the waves. "It's never too late," she whispered. "But it has to be real this time," he smiled. "Real is all I have left to give." They sat there until the sky turned pink, saying nothing else. The years, the pain, the love, everything was still there, just quieter now, softer around the edges. As the evening light faded, Emma leaned her head on Michael's shoulder. For the first time in a long while, it didn't feel like remembering the past. It felt like beginning again. The morning light spilled through the window, soft and golden. Emma woke first, listening to the slow rhythm of Michael's breathing beside her. For a moment, she just watched him. The lines on his face, the faint gray in his beard, the peace she hadn't seen there in years. It struck her how different he looked when he wasn't trying so hard to be strong. She slipped quietly out of bed, made coffee, and stood by the window overlooking the lake. The reflection of the trees swayed gently on the water, almost hypnotic. She thought about how far they'd come, not just as a couple, but as two people who had learned to survive life's quiet disappointments. When Michael joined her, mug in hand, he said, "You're up early." "Couldn't sleep," she replied. "Too many thoughts, good ones or bad ones?" "A mix," she said, smiling faintly. "But mostly, I was thinking about us." He leaned against the counter. "That's usually dangerous," she laughed softly. "Not this time." Michael looked at her for a long moment. "Emma, we can't undo the years, but I don't want to keep living like I'm waiting for something that's already gone." She turned to face him. "Then stop waiting. If we're doing this, we need to do it for real. No half promises, no disappearing when things get messy." "I know," he said quietly. "I've done that before. I'm done running." For a while they stood in silence, both understanding that this wasn't about falling in love again. It was about learning how to stay. "Do you want to come back here next month?" he asked finally. "Maybe make this our place again?" Emma hesitated. "If we do that, it's not a vacation. It's a choice." "A start," he nodded. "Then let's start." She didn't say anything, she just reached out and took his hand. The gesture was simple, but it carried the weight of everything they'd been through. They spent the rest of the day walking around the lake, talking about small things. The smell of pine, the sound of the water, the way autumn always felt like both an ending and a beginning. That night, as they packed their bags, Emma looked around the cabin one last time. It wasn't just a place anymore. It had become a reminder that love doesn't always arrive loudly or perfectly. Sometimes it returns quietly when you've finally learned how to listen. As they drove away, she reached over and turned on the radio. An old song played, one they used to dance to in their 20s. Michael smiled and turned up the volume. The road ahead was long and uncertain, but for the first time in years it didn't feel lonely. It felt like home was somewhere they could build again. 2 months later, the lake was frozen. The air had that still heavy silence that only winter brings. Michael stood by the fireplace, tossing another log into the flames. The cabin had become their second home now, a quiet escape where time slowed down and words carried weight again. Emma was sitting at the table with her reading glasses on, flipping through a small stack of mail she had brought from the city. Most of it was junk. Then she paused, holding up one envelope. "It's from David," she said quietly. Michael froze. "David?" "Your son." He stared at the letter in her hand like it was a ghost. "Open it," he said finally. She nodded and tore it open gently. Inside was a handwritten note, short, uneven, rushed. She started to read aloud. "Dad, I don't know where to start. I heard from the lawyer that you changed the deed before you left. You didn't tell me. I guess I deserved that. I was angry at first, but after a while, I realized I'm not angry anymore. I'm just ashamed. Mom would have told me I was acting like a fool. She'd be right. I don't know if we can fix things, but I'd like to try. I don't need the house. I just need to know if you'll talk to me again." Emma looked up at him. His face was unreadable, eyes fixed on the fire. "What are you thinking?" she asked. He didn't answer right away. He just kept staring at the flames, his jaw tight. "You know," he said finally, "I waited a long time for that letter. I told myself I didn't care anymore, but I did. I still do." "Then write him back," she said softly. "I don't know what to say." "Say the truth. That's all he needs." He sat down at the table, pulled out a piece of paper, and stared at it for a long time. The silence stretched until finally he began to write. His handwriting was slow, careful. "David, you took my trust and I let you. I wanted so badly to believe you were still that little boy who used to run to the door when I came home from work. But I wasn't angry about the house. I was angry because I raised a son who forgot that love isn't about taking. It's about remembering who helped you build the ground you stand on. I don't need an apology. I need honesty. If you're ready for that, so am I." "Dad," when he finished, Emma placed her hand over his. "That's enough," she said. "You said what mattered." They mailed the letter the next morning. For weeks there was no reply. Life carried on. Quiet breakfasts, long walks, laughter that felt lighter than before. Then one evening, as the snow began to fall, there was a knock at the cabin door. Michael opened it, and there stood David. Older, tired, but with the same uncertain eyes he'd had as a boy. For a long moment, no one spoke. Then David said, "I didn't know if you'd want to see me." Michael stepped aside. "Come in," he said. They sat by the fire not as father and son divided by pride, but as two men learning how to begin again. No speeches, no grand apologies, just silence and the warmth of a room that still smelled like pine and forgiveness. Later, as Emma poured coffee for the three of them, she looked at Michael. He smiled, small and genuine. Something in his eyes had changed. Outside, the snow fell harder, covering the ground in white. Soft, clean, forgiving. Inside, after years of distance, a family began to thaw. And in that quiet cabin by the lake, Michael finally realized something. Sometimes, losing everything is what it takes to find what truly matters. Sometimes life doesn't fall apart to break us. It falls apart to show us who truly stands when everything else is gone. Michael lost his home, his trust, and the people he thought would never betray him. But in that loss, he found something far greater: peace, honesty, and a love that didn't need to be bought or proven. The house, the deed, the betrayal, none of it mattered anymore. What mattered was that forgiveness had finally walked back through his door. In a world that often measures worth in things, Michael learned that the real wealth is in moments, the quiet kind, shared over coffee, by a fire, in a place that finally feels like home.